Welcome to Zahra's Folktales. Before we begin, don't forget to subscribe. Now enjoy. 15 years is a long time to wait for a promise, and Amara knew it more than anyone. She met Chaik when she was barely 20, a girl with dreams far bigger than her small world. He wasn't rich, not even close, but he had a way of talking that made her believe tomorrow would be brighter if only she stayed by his side. He would sit with her under the mango tree in her mother's compound, saying things like, "Just wait for me, Amara. I'll make it. You'll see. We'll have a wedding people will talk about for years." And each time, she nodded, believing him with all her heart. At first, everyone envied them. They were inseparable, always together at church, at small family gatherings, even walking hand in hand along the dusty road that led to the market. His friends teased him, calling her his shadow. Amara didn't mind. She wore that title with pride because she thought love was enough to hold everything together. But love, as she would later learn, isn't always enough. While her mates got married, started families, and built homes, she kept waiting. Her mother's voice often pierced her peace like a sharp knife, asking, "Amara, when will he marry you? You are not getting younger." Each time, Amara defended him. She said, "Mama, these things take time. He's still trying to find his feet." But deep down, the questions began to plant tiny seeds of doubt. Years rolled by, one after the other. Chaik changed jobs more times than Amara could count. He borrowed money to start businesses that never survived past 6 months. Amara was always there, contributing from her little salary as a teacher, cooking for him, washing his clothes, encouraging him to keep trying. Her friends whispered behind her back, some even said it to her face. 15 years is too long to wait for a man. She ignored them, holding tightly to the picture in her head of a white wedding gown and church bells ringing. The hardest part was watching how he changed. In the beginning, Chaik's eyes lit up whenever he saw her, like she was the only person in the room. But as the years passed, that glow dimmed. He no longer looked at her the way he used to. Sometimes, when she called, he would say he was busy and hang up quickly. At first, she convinced herself it was stress, that he was just overwhelmed with trying to succeed. But the excuses grew heavier, and his presence in her life became lighter. Still, Amara stayed. She told herself that real love doesn't run away when things get hard. She believed in patience, in sacrifice, in loyalty. She never imagined that the same man she poured her life into would one day turn around and give his promises to someone else. But before that storm, before the heartbreak that would crush her chest like a stone, there were the little moments that felt normal. The birthday she celebrated with him where he forgot to buy her a gift and laughed it off. The Christmas when he promised to introduce her to his extended family but suddenly claimed he had to travel. The countless nights she lay awake, staring at her ceiling, wondering when her own turn would come. And yet, in those moments, she still smiled whenever his name appeared on her phone. She still cooked for him, still listened to his stories, still dreamed of being called his wife. She thought she was investing in a future. She didn't know she was giving away years she could never get back. Amara's story began with hope, with laughter, with long walks under the evening sky of Enugu. But as the years stretched on, hope became heavy, laughter became rare, and the road she walked with him began to feel endless. What she didn't know then was that this road wasn't leading to a wedding, it was dragging her slowly toward a heartbreak that would leave scars deeper than anything she had ever imagined. The second part of Amara's story begins with the kind of silence that makes the heart uneasy. By the time 10 years had passed, silence had become her uninvited companion. She was 30, still unmarried, still waiting. At that age in Nigeria, neighbors no longer whispered, they spoke openly. Aunties at weddings looked her over with a blend of pity and judgment. Younger cousins who once looked up to her now greeted her with a subtle kind of arrogance, proud that they were the ones with rings on their fingers and babies in their arms. Amara felt all of it, but she pushed it aside because she still had Chaik. In her heart, she believed that if she just endured, if she remained loyal, the story would change. He was her investment, her one chance at the future she dreamed of. She told herself, I have already given him years. I can't stop now. What if I leave and he marries another woman the very next year? All my sacrifice will be wasted. This fear gripped her so tightly that it chained her to him, even when her instincts whispered that she was losing herself. Chaik had changed in ways she could no longer deny. He was no longer the young man who made promises under the mango tree. He had grown comfortable with her presence, so comfortable that he no longer saw her as someone he needed to pursue or impress. He would call her late in the evening, asking for food, asking for money, sometimes even asking for favors that drained her spirit. And Amara, because of love, kept giving. There were days she stood at the ATM, withdrawing the last cash from her account just so he could pay his rent. There were nights she cooked until midnight because he said he was hungry. And there were countless mornings she ironed his clothes before rushing to school, only for him to step out and not even say thank you. Every time her mother tried to talk sense into her, Amara shut her down. Mama, please. You don't understand him. He's just under pressure. You'll see, one day, everything will change. But the truth was, her mother understood more than she did. The old woman had lived long enough to know when a man's words had lost their weight. One evening, after a long day at school, Amara visited Chaik's apartment. She wanted to surprise him with his favorite soup. She opened the door with the key he had given her years ago, only to freeze at the sight before her. A young woman sat comfortably on the couch, scrolling through her phone, while Chaik walked out from the bedroom tying his towel. The shock made Amara's hands tremble so much that the pot nearly slipped from her grasp. The girl looked up casually and asked, "Who's this?" The ease with which she asked cut Amara deeper than a knife. Chaik, without a flinch, replied, "She's just a friend." Just a friend. Those words rang in her ears like thunder. 15 years of cooking, washing, waiting, sacrificing, all reduced to just a friend. She wanted to scream, to break the pot, to run out and never look back, but instead, she stood frozen, her heart cracking in silence. Later that night, after the girl had left, Amara confronted him. "Just a friend? Chaik, is that what I am to you after everything?" He rubbed his head and sighed, not even meeting her eyes. "Amara, you know how things are. You put too much pressure on this. Can't you just relax and let me handle things my way?" She stared at him in disbelief. 15 years, and he was still telling her to be patient. 15 years, and he still spoke as though marriage was some distant dream, not a responsibility. That night, she cried until her pillow was soaked. The kind of crying that leaves your chest aching, the kind that makes you wonder how you got trapped in such a cycle. But even after that, Amara stayed. She told herself the girl was just a distraction, that he would come back to his senses. She clung to the memory of who he was, ignoring who he had become. Months later, another humiliation came. At a family gathering, one of her uncles pulled her aside and said, "Amara, are you not ashamed? How long will you keep playing wife to a man who refuses to marry you? Don't you see that he is just using you?" His words burned. She wanted to defend herself, but this time the words stuck in her throat. Deep down, she knew the uncle was right. Every passing day began to feel heavier. She noticed how her friends avoided inviting her to bridal showers and baby dedications. They loved her, but they didn't want her sadness to dampen their joy. She would scroll through social media, seeing pictures of women she once sat with in classrooms, now holding their children with pride, their husbands' arms wrapped around them. And there she was, still waiting for a man who no longer looked at her the same way. Her 30s stretched into her mid-30s. She was now 35, still holding on to a love that had drained her. Chaik was 37, yet he behaved like a man with endless time. He gave excuses upon excuses, each one weaker than the last. "I'm not financially stable yet. Marriage is not something we should rush. Just give me a little more time." What Amara didn't know was that time was not her ally. Time was slipping away, and with every day she gave him, he was planning a life that had no space for her. And so, her second chapter was not filled with big moments of betrayal alone, But with small daily cuts, the cold replies, the broken promises, the silent phone calls, the endless waiting. It was a slow bleeding, the kind of pain that kills not suddenly, but gradually, until you realize you no longer recognize the person in the mirror. Amara thought she was holding on to love. But in truth, she was holding on to an illusion, one that was leading her straight toward a heartbreak she never imagined could happen to her. By the time Amara turned 36, her reflection had begun to change in ways she couldn't ignore. She noticed the fine lines around her eyes, the faint shadows of tiredness that lingered no matter how much she rested. It wasn't just age that was showing, it was the weight of 15 years poured into a love that had stopped pouring back into her. Yet, she clung to Chaik, convinced that the story couldn't possibly end like this. Her loyalty was no longer a quiet strength, it had become a prison. Every time she thought of leaving, a voice inside her whispered, "What if the years you invested finally pay off tomorrow? What if you walk away just before the breakthrough?" That thought was enough to keep her bound, even when her heart screamed otherwise. Chaik had grown bolder in his neglect. He no longer tried to hide his distractions. His phone buzzed at odd hours with messages he shielded from her eyes. When she asked, he brushed it off. "Amara, don't start. You always suspect nonsense. Can't I have friends anymore?" His tone was sharp, dismissive, as though her feelings were a burden he had no patience to carry. The distance between them widened, but Amara kept crossing the gap with patience, convincing herself that love meant endurance. She went on cooking for him, washing his clothes, even helping him pay off debts he carelessly accumulated. When he spoke of business plans, she listened eagerly, offering her teacher's salary to help him chase dreams that always ended in ashes. And when he returned empty-handed, she comforted him like a mother soothing a child. But each sacrifice left a small wound inside her. She began to feel invisible, like her efforts were swallowed whole by a man who no longer saw her worth. Her family grew weary of waiting. One Sunday afternoon, after church service, her elder brother pulled her aside. "Amara, I don't want to hurt you, but this has gone on too long. That man has no plan for you. He's wasting your time." She shook her head, fighting tears. "You don't understand. He loves me. He's just trying to get things right." Her brother sighed, looking at her with the sadness of someone watching a loved one sink in quicksand. "Love without action is nothing, Amara. You deserve better." But Amara wasn't ready to let go. To her, letting go meant admitting she had wasted the most important years of her life. She couldn't face that truth, not yet. The turning point came one Saturday evening. She had planned to surprise Chaik with a visit, carrying a basket of fruit and some food she knew he liked. As she approached his street, she noticed cars parked outside his compound, more than usual. Music floated through the air, mixed with laughter. She paused, confused, then walked in, thinking perhaps he was hosting friends. What she saw made her heart collapse inside her chest. His compound was decorated, chairs neatly arranged, people dressed in vibrant clothes. In the center of it all stood Chaik, smiling, radiant, holding the hand of a woman Amara had never seen before. The woman's finger glittered with a fresh engagement ring. Her knees nearly buckled. She clutched the basket tightly, her body trembling. A neighbor who recognized her whispered, "Ah, Amara, you came? Didn't you hear? Chaik is engaged. They're having a small celebration today." Engaged. The word tore through her like glass. 15 years of waiting, of believing, of defending him, and he had given the promise of forever to someone else. Not just in secret, but openly, with music and laughter, as though she had never existed. She stood there frozen, unable to move, her eyes locked on him. Chaik glanced at her briefly, his smile faltering for a second, but he quickly looked away, tightening his grip on the other woman's hand. That single act told her everything he had chosen, and it wasn't her. The basket slipped from her hands, fruit rolling across the ground. Conversations hushed as people noticed her. Pity filled their eyes, the kind of pity that cuts deeper than mockery. Someone bent to pick up the fruit, but Amara stepped back, shaking her head. She turned and walked away, each step heavier than the last, her heart shattering into pieces so small she wondered if she would ever gather them again. That night, Amara lay on her bed, staring at the ceiling. Tears refused to come. The pain was too heavy for tears, it sat in her chest like a stone pressing against her lungs. She thought of the 15 years she had given him, the youth she had sacrificed, the dreams she had shelved while waiting. It all played before her eyes like a cruel film, ending with the image of him smiling beside another woman. Her phone buzzed. A message from Chaik. "I'm sorry you had to find out this way. Please understand, it's not you, it's just life. You've been good to me, but things don't always work out as we plan. I'll always respect you for what you did for me." Respect. That was all he had left for her after 15 years, respect. She read the message again and again until her vision blurred, not from tears but from the hollowness that swallowed her. In that moment, Amara realized she had been living in a dream where love and patience would be rewarded. But reality was far colder. Reality was that she had been holding on to a man who never intended to hold her back. Her heart ached, but beneath the ache, a small voice began to whisper. It wasn't loud yet, but it was there. The voice said, "Amara, you must rise. This is not the end of your story." Though she didn't yet believe it, that whisper would be the seed of something new, something stronger than the 15 wasted years. But for now, she lay in silence, clutching her pillow, wondering how a woman could give so much and still end up with nothing. Amara woke up the morning after the engagement celebration with a pounding in her chest that felt heavier than any fever she had ever known. The air in her room was still, but inside her heart a storm raged. She sat on the edge of her bed, staring at her hands as if they were strangers. These were the hands that had cooked for him, washed his clothes, counted money into his palms, held his face when he cried about failures. These were the hands that had built him up while neglecting their own dreams. And now, those same hands trembled with the question, "What do I have left?" She couldn't bring herself to eat. She couldn't bring herself to leave the house. For days, she lay curled on her bed, staring at the ceiling. Her phone buzzed endlessly with messages from people who had been at Chaik's engagement. Some were filled with pity, others with awkward sympathy. Even her closest friends didn't know what to say. They sent short notes like "Stay strong" or "God knows best." None of it touched the wound inside her. Her mother entered one afternoon, bringing food she didn't touch. Sitting beside her, the old woman placed a gentle hand on her back. "My daughter, tears cannot change the past. You have cried enough. You must learn to stand again." But Amara shook her head, her voice barely a whisper. "Mama, I gave him everything. Everything. And now I have nothing to show for it." Her mother sighed, her eyes moist but steady. "You have yourself, Amara. You are still breathing. As long as you breathe, you can rebuild. He may have wasted your years, but don't let him waste your life." The words settled in her mind, but they didn't take root immediately. Healing is never instant, it is slow, like dawn creeping after the longest night. Weeks turned into months. Chaik went on with his new life, his engagement plastered all over social media. Amara avoided it at first, but one day, curiosity dragged her into scrolling through their pictures. There he was, smiling the smile she once thought belonged only to her, wrapping his arms around another woman with the same charm that once made her knees weak. It hurt so deeply she felt as if the ground under her was slipping. She threw her phone onto the bed, covering her face as hot tears finally came. But unlike before, this time her tears did not leave her empty. They carried with them a strange kind of clarity, like a wound that begins to sting because it has finally been cleaned. It was then she began to remember who she had been before Chaik. She thought of the young girl who loved teaching children, who used to write poems in her notebooks, who dreamed of traveling outside her small town. She realized how much of herself she had buried while waiting for him. So she started small. She went back to school not just as a teacher but as a student, taking evening classes to sharpen her qualifications. She joined a women's fellowship in church, where she began to speak about patience, not as blind waiting, but as strength in God. The women listened to her, and she realized her voice still carried weight. But the road wasn't smooth. There were nights when she still woke up crying, remembering the sound of his laughter, the promises he never fulfilled. There were days she felt embarrassed to walk into gatherings where people knew her story. Some women whispered, "That's the one who wasted all her years with Chaik." Those whispers stabbed at her pride, but she learned to keep her head high. She told herself, "I cannot erase what happened, but I can write what comes next." One afternoon at school, as she was marking her pupils' work, a little girl asked her, "Auntie Amara, why don't you have children?" The question hit her unexpectedly. She smiled gently, masking her ache, and replied, "Because God is still writing my story." Later that night, she sat alone and repeated those words to herself, letting them sink deeper. Meanwhile, Chaik's story took a different turn. Though she didn't go looking for updates, people carried tales to her. His new wife was young, vibrant, but their marriage was not as flawless as their engagement pictures had suggested. Rumors spread that he still struggled financially, that he still carried the same carelessness into his new life. At first, hearing this gave Amara a bitter kind of satisfaction. But soon she stopped caring. His downfall wouldn't heal her wound. Her healing had to come from within. The real turning point came one evening during a fellowship meeting. Amara had been asked to share a short encouragement. She hesitated, but when she stood up, words poured out of her like a river breaking free. She spoke about waiting, about love, about giving your heart to someone who doesn't know its worth. She told them how dangerous it is to lose yourself while trying to hold on to another. Her voice shook, but her honesty drew tears from the women around her. When she finished, they surrounded her with prayers and hugs. For the first time in years, Amara felt seen not as Chaik's shadow, but as herself. From that day, she began to rebuild deliberately. She started saving money for herself, not for a man. She traveled to Abuja for a short training program and returned with fresh ideas for her teaching career. She even bought herself new clothes, bright colors she hadn't worn in years, as if reminding herself she was still alive, still worthy of joy. And then came the unexpected. At a seminar for teachers in Enugu, she met someone, a man named Emeka. He wasn't the type to overwhelm a room with charm, but his presence was steady, kind, respectful. They struck up conversations about education, about books, about dreams beyond the classroom. He didn't flirt carelessly, he simply listened to her, really listened. It was something she hadn't felt in years. At first, she was cautious, even distant. Her heart had scars that made her wary. But Emeka didn't rush. He treated her not as a woman desperate for marriage, but as a woman of value. His quiet consistency began to stir something inside her, a reminder that she was capable of being loved without having to beg for it. Amara knew she wasn't healed completely, but she was healing. She wasn't rushing into new promises, but she was learning to trust herself again. She was learning that her life didn't end because Chaik walked away, it was only beginning. And as she stood by her window one evening, watching children play in the street, she whispered to herself, "He may have taken 15 years, but he will not take the rest of me." The voice inside her, once faint, now roared louder than ever, "Rise, Amara. This is your new chapter." Amara's life after Chaik was not a sudden explosion of sunshine and laughter, it was a slow dawn, the kind that stretches across the horizon in quiet defiance of night. Every step forward felt like a victory, and every stumble reminded her that healing was not a straight road but a winding one. She began to fill her days with new routines. Each morning before school, she stood in front of her small mirror and said something she had never said for years, "I matter." At first, the words sounded foreign, almost like a lie. But the more she said them, the more they began to settle into her bones. Her colleagues at school noticed the change. The woman who once walked with her shoulders bent now carried herself with a quiet confidence. She laughed more freely with her pupils, wearing brighter clothes that matched the spark returning to her eyes. Some whispered, "Amara looks different. She must have found love again." But they were wrong. What she had found was herself. And yet, the scars of the past did not vanish easily. Nights were still heavy. She often lay awake, her mind wandering to memories of wasted years, wondering if she had lost too much time to build a meaningful life. At 37, she saw women younger than her already raising children, enjoying the family life she once longed for. Sometimes envy pricked her, and guilt followed swiftly. But each time, she whispered, "My time is mine. My story is mine." Emeka's presence grew slowly in her world. After the seminar in Enugu, he began calling occasionally, asking about her classes, sharing stories of his own work. His conversations never carried the weight of expectations, never demanded more than she could give. He asked questions about her dreams, not about what she could sacrifice for him, but about who she wanted to be. At first, Amara held back, giving short answers, afraid of opening her heart again. But with time, she found herself talking more, even laughing in ways she hadn't in years. One Saturday, Emeka invited her to a teacher's workshop in Nsukka. She hesitated, wondering if people would assume it was a date. But something inside her nudged her to go. That day, she wore a simple blue dress, one she had bought months earlier but never had the courage to wear. When she stepped out and saw his smile, genuine and warm, she felt something stir, not the dizzying rush she once mistook for love, but a calm assurance, like a gentle river flowing. At the workshop, Emeka introduced her proudly to his colleagues. "This is Amara, one of the best teachers I've ever met." His words caught her off guard. For years, she had been the one lifting someone else up, yet here was a man lifting her in front of others without shame or hesitation. It was new. It was refreshing. Still, she remained guarded. After the event, as they walked side by side, Emeka said softly, "You have a strong presence, Amara. The way you speak, the way you carry yourself, it commands respect." She smiled faintly, shaking her head. "You don't know my story. I don't need to know everything to see your strength," he replied. That sentence echoed in her heart long after the day ended. Meanwhile, Chike's shadow had not completely vanished. News of his struggles reached her through the grapevine. His new marriage was cracking under the weight of financial strain and mistrust. Some said his wife often complained about his carelessness, that she threatened to leave. At first, Amara felt a twinge of bitterness, so he could not even change for her. But soon she realized she didn't want to carry his story anymore. She had spent too many years tied to his failures. Now, she wanted her freedom. Freedom meant forgiveness, not for him, but for herself. One evening, she sat at her table, lit a small candle, and wrote on a piece of paper, "I forgive you, Chike. Not because you deserve it, but because I deserve peace." She folded the paper, burned it in a small dish, and watched the ashes scatter. For the first time in 15 years, her chest felt lighter. Months later, she was invited to speak at a youth program in church. She almost declined, afraid her story would embarrass her. But something pushed her forward. Standing before the young women, she told them her truth. She spoke of giving your best years to someone who does not value you, of losing yourself while waiting for promises that never come. She warned them gently, "Do not let your worth be tied to someone else's delay. If a man loves you, his actions will prove it. If not, walk away with your dignity intact." The room was silent when she finished, then it erupted in applause. Young girls came to her afterward, tears in their eyes, thanking her for her honesty. One said, "Auntie Amara, your story saved me. I was about to wait for a man who keeps giving excuses. But now I know better." In that moment, Amara realized her pain had not been wasted, it had become a lantern for others. Emeka watched her from the back of the hall, admiration shining in his eyes. Later, as they walked out together, he said, "Do you know how powerful you are, Amara? You turned pain into wisdom. Not everyone can do that." She looked at him, her heart softening. For the first time, she allowed herself to imagine what it might feel like to be loved in a way that didn't require her to shrink. She didn't give him an answer that day, didn't confess any feelings. But inside her, something fragile yet strong began to bloom. By her 38th birthday, Amara had transformed. She bought herself a cake, invited her family and a few friends, and celebrated not a wedding, not a man, but herself. Laughter filled her home as she cut the cake, her nieces and nephews singing around her. For the first time in decades, she felt whole without needing someone else's approval. As the evening ended, Emeka stayed behind to help clean up. They worked side by side, the silence comfortable. Then he looked at her with quiet certainty and said, "Amara, I don't want to rush you, but I need you to know if there's ever a chance for us, I will treasure you the way you deserve." Her heart skipped. For years she had heard empty promises, but this one felt different. It wasn't dressed in flowery words or grand declarations. It was steady, respectful, and clear. She didn't reply immediately. She only smiled, placing her hand gently on his arm. For now, that was enough. That night, lying in bed, Amara whispered to herself, "I am no longer the woman who wasted 15 years. I am the woman who survived them." And with that, she closed her eyes, drifting into sleep with a heart no longer bound by the past but leaning gently toward a new future. The years Amara thought she had lost became the very foundation of the woman she now was. By the time her 40th birthday drew near, she no longer saw herself through the eyes of those who pitied her. She stood tall, her laughter carried weight, her words carried fire, and her silence carried strength. She had been broken, but she was no longer fragile. Life in Enugu had a rhythm now. Her mornings were for teaching, her evenings often filled with writing and speaking engagements. The story she once wished she could bury had become the very thing people wanted to hear. At women's conferences, in youth fellowships, at schools, her name was whispered with respect. "Invite Amara, she has a story that changes lives." The irony was never lost on her. What she once called wasted years had become wisdom for others. Girls sat in the front row, hanging on her every word, their eyes wide, some clutching notebooks to write down her sentences. Mothers thanked her after her talks, some in tears, saying, "You have opened my daughter's eyes. You have saved her years." And while Amara poured herself into others, something else was quietly blooming in her personal life. Emeka had not disappeared. He had not pushed, he had not demanded, but he had remained a steady presence, a friend who slowly became more than a friend. He showed up in ways that healed wounds Chike had left raw. When Amara fell sick with malaria, he brought food and medicine, sitting quietly by her side until she was strong again. When she published a small collection of poems written during her healing, he bought copies for all his colleagues and told them, "Read this. This is the voice of someone who knows life deeply." When she doubted herself, he reminded her, "Amara, don't shrink. You are already more than enough." At first, she feared she would fall into the same trap, losing herself in someone else's shadow. But Emeka was different. He never asked her to dim her light. He clapped when she shone. And slowly, Amara allowed herself to trust again. Still, healing came with tests. One Sunday afternoon, she was invited to a wedding in town. She hesitated when she saw the names on the invitation. It was Chike's younger cousin getting married. Memories rushed back, but she decided to attend anyway. She dressed simply in a soft yellow gown and went, her head high. When she arrived, she saw him. Chike. Time had not been kind. His eyes carried the weariness of a man still chasing promises he couldn't keep. His once bold shoulders now sagged with disappointment. Their eyes met briefly across the hall. For a moment, the air thickened with everything unsaid. But Amara did not flinch. She smiled faintly, greeted politely, and walked past him as if his chapter in her book had been long closed. Later that day, someone whispered to her, "You know his marriage didn't last. They are separated now." But instead of satisfaction, Amara only felt a quiet pity. Not because she wanted him back, never again, but because she finally understood. He had not only wasted her years, he had wasted his own. Back home that evening, Emeka came to see her. She told him about the wedding, about seeing Chike, about the strange calm she felt. Emeka listened, then said, "That's because you've healed. You don't need his validation anymore. You've built a life he cannot touch. And he was right. As months passed, Emeka's intentions became clear. One evening, he sat with her under the veranda after a heavy rain. The air smelled fresh, children laughed somewhere in the distance, and he turned to her, his voice steady. Amara, he said, I know where you've been. I know the weight you've carried. I don't want to replace those years or pretend they didn't happen. But I want to give you new years, better years. Will you let me? Her throat tightened. For years, she had dreamed of those words from the wrong man. Now, hearing them from the right one, she realized why she had to go through all she did to understand the difference between empty promises and true intention. She didn't answer right away. She placed her hand in his, not trembling this time, but steady. I won't waste myself again, Emeka. If we walk this road, it will be with respect, with love, with honesty. His smile told her everything. That's all I want, Amara. Their relationship grew with quiet strength. No grand gestures, no dramatic declarations, just daily acts of love that built a foundation firmer than anything she had known before. And when, 2 years later, they stood before family and friends in a small church, exchanging vows, Amara did not cry out of desperation, but out of gratitude. She had survived the fire and come out shining. At the reception, her mother held her close, whispering, My daughter, your story is proof that God's time is always best. Her friends who once pitied her now cheered, not just for her marriage, but for her victory. Amara stood there, looking around, realizing she had lost 15 years, but she had gained something priceless, herself. And because she had found herself, she could now be loved fully, without fear, without begging. That night, as she lay beside Emeka, she whispered a prayer not for the past, not even for the man who had broken her, but for the women still waiting, still giving themselves away to men who never intended to stay. She prayed they would learn sooner than she did, that they would rise without losing as much time. Amara's story was no longer about wasted years. It was about resilience, about rediscovery, about love that begins first with yourself and then spills into the lives of those who deserve it. And though scars still marked her heart, they no longer hurt. They glowed as proof of survival. For the rest of her life, whenever she stood before crowds to speak, she would end her story with one line that captured everything she had lived through. Sometimes life takes from you, but sometimes it gives back in a way that makes you forget the years you thought were lost. I thought I wasted 15 years, but the truth is I was being prepared for the years that truly matter. And that brings us to the end of Amara's journey, a story of love, betrayal, pain, and finally, rediscovery. Her life reminds us that no matter how many years feel wasted, there's always hope for a new beginning. If this story touched your heart, make sure you hit that subscribe button so you don't miss more powerful stories like this. And before you go, tell us in the comments, what country are you watching from, and what time is it right now where you are? We'd love to know.